Ever thought a terrible night could change your life? Watch how a waiter became famous for his brutal honesty towards Snoop Dogg and the wild journey that unfolded from there. Don't miss out. Subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below to dive into this surprising story. Waiter insulted Snoop Dogg in a luxury restaurant, but when he discovered the truth, you won't. The rain softly struck the windows of Harmony Haven, a discreet yet elegant restaurant in the heart of Los Angeles. The establishment, with its cream-colored walls and dim lighting, was a refuge for those looking to escape the city's hustle and bustle. The aroma of freshly baked bread mixed with subtle notes of fresh herbs and melted butter filled the air. Snoop Dogg ran his hand over his face, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had piled up over the past week. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed countless sleepless nights spent working on his latest album and managing his business ventures. His phone kept vibrating in the pocket of his worn jeans, but for the first time that day, he decided to ignore it. "Just one night," he murmured to himself as he pushed open the heavy wooden door of the restaurant. One night without being Snoop Dogg. The hostess, a young woman named Laura with blonde hair tied into an immaculate bun, barely glanced at him. His black sweater, which had seen better days, and his faded jeans didn't suggest he was the usual type of customer for the establishment. "Table for one?" she asked, flipping through the reservation book with little interest. "Yes. Preferably something away from the windows," Snoop replied, mentally thanking her for not recognizing him. In the kitchen, Diego Martinez was polishing a wine glass as he listened to his co-workers' complaints. At 35 years old, he had spent half his life working in restaurants, and the last 5 years at Harmony Haven had been particularly challenging. "Did you see the guy who just walked in?" Sophia, one of the waitresses, commented while picking up an order. "He looks like he got lost on the way to McDonald's." Diego glanced through the kitchen door. "The guy at table 15, that's my section." "Great. Another one here to occupy a table for 2 hours, just to order a salad and tap water." The night had started poorly for Diego. Earlier, his mother had called to tell him she needed another expensive treatment, and the insurance refused to cover it. The bills were piling up, and his younger sister depended on him to pay for college. "Chef Jules is in a terrible mood," Carlos, another waiter, warned as he entered the kitchen. Someone criticized his flan on Yelp. Diego adjusted his black apron and reviewed his notepad. Table 15 would be his 6th of the day, and it wasn't even late yet. He headed over, practicing his professional smile, even though inside he felt like the world was collapsing. As he walked to Snoop's table, he noticed the customer's relaxed posture and the weary look in his eyes, reminding him of his own struggles. "Good evening," Diego's voice interrupted Snoop's thoughts. "I'm Diego, and I'll be your waiter tonight. Can I get you something to drink while you review the menu?" Snoop looked up from his phone, where he had just read yet another negative headline about himself. "A whiskey neat, please." "Whatever you have." Diego narrowed his eyes slightly. The restaurant was known for its extensive wine list and French cuisine, not spirits. "We have Macallan 18-year-old for $145 a shot," he replied with a tone that suggested his client might want to reconsider. "That's fine," Snoop murmured, returning to his phone. Diego walked away, muttering under his breath about customers who didn't even appreciate where they were dining. At the bar, Sophia waited with a mocking smile. "Your table 15 seems fascinating," she joked while preparing martinis. "He could at least pretend he knows where he is," Diego replied. "Did you see how he's dressed? This isn't Denny's." At his table, Snoop was aware of the staff's glances and murmurs. He found it almost amusing. After weeks of constant adulation and people trying to impress him, there was something refreshing about being treated like a nobody. The restaurant began to fill up. A couple celebrating their anniversary took the table next to his, the man in an impeccable suit, the woman in a dress that likely cost more than Diego's car. At another table, a group of entertainment executives animatedly discussed their latest project. Diego returned with the whiskey, setting it on the table with less care than necessary. A few drops splashed onto the white tablecloth. "Are you ready to order?" he asked, his pen tapping rhythmically against the notepad. Snoop closed the menu. "What do you recommend?" The question seemed to irritate Diego further. "Everything on our menu is excellent," he replied dryly, "but maybe you'd like to start with something simple like the soup of the day." "It's more accessible." Accessible? Snoop raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the barely veiled audacity of the waiter. Yes, $15. Diego emphasized the price as if speaking to a child. The lobster is market price, which today is significantly higher. A message lit up Snoop's phone, another problem with his label. He ignored it, finding the waiter's attitude strangely entertaining. I'll have the foie gras to start, Snoop said, pronouncing foie gras in a way that made Diego visibly wince. And then the filet mignon, medium rare. Diego couldn't help himself. Are you sure? Foie gras is quite sophisticated. It's not for everyone's palate. At the next table, the anniversary couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. The waiter's attitude was clearly inappropriate, but Snoop seemed almost amused. I'm sure, Snoop replied simply. And a bottle of wine. What do you suggest? Diego looked at Snoop's worn sweater and then at the wine list. We have a pretty basic Merlot for $50, probably more suitable for your budget. Shh, bring me the Chateau Lafite Rothschild 2010, Snoop responded, naming one of the most expensive wines on the list without even glancing at it. Diego paled slightly. Sir, that wine costs $2,500 a bottle. Perhaps you should— The bottle will be fine, Snoop interrupted, returning to his phone. Diego walked away, muttering under his breath about customers trying to pretend to be what they weren't. In the kitchen, he shared the story with his co-workers. I bet his card gets declined, Sophia laughed. Remember the guy last month who tried to impress his date and ended up washing dishes? As the night progressed, Diego grew bolder in his condescending remarks. When Snoop mispronounced Bordeaux, Diego corrected him with barely disguised disdain. When Snoop asked for ketchup for his $120 steak, Diego practically had to restrain himself from rolling his eyes. You know, Diego said while clearing the dessert plate, next time there's a lovely place nearby called Burger King, I think you'd feel more comfortable there. The diners at nearby tables held their breath, expecting an outburst of anger that never came. Instead, Snoop gave a slight smile and pulled out his phone, seemingly to record something. The rain outside had intensified, and occasional thunder provided a dramatic backdrop to the scene about to unfold. Diego had no idea that his life was about to take a radical turn. For now, however, he was just another grumpy waiter at a luxury restaurant, trying to survive another night. In the kitchen, the staff placed bets on whether the customer at table 15 would be able to pay the bill. None of them imagined they were witnessing the beginning of a story that would soon become legendary at the restaurant. The night was drawing to a close, and Diego prepared the bill with a mix of anticipation and disdain. The total came to over $3,000, a sum he was sure would create an awkward moment as he walked toward table 15. He mentally rehearsed what he would say when the card was declined, but that revealing moment would have to wait until the next chapter of this story. Because for now, Diego remained simply a waiter who had dared to treat one of the most iconic figures in music with disdain, without the slightest idea of who he really was. The atmosphere in the restaurant had subtly shifted. The diners at nearby tables, initially absorbed in their own conversations, were now discreetly paying attention to the interaction between the arrogant waiter and the seemingly humble customer at table 15. Excuse me? Snoop called out to Diego as he passed by with a tray of desserts for another table. Could you bring me another whiskey? Diego let out an exaggerated sigh. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer a glass of water? It's on the house. An executive at the neighboring table nearly choked on her wine upon hearing the remark. Her dining companion looked at her with a mix of amusement and embarrassment. The whiskey will be fine, Snoop replied, who had begun to find an odd pleasure in the situation. It was the first time in months that someone treated him without any kind of flattery or fear. In the kitchen, Sophia intercepted Diego as he prepared the order. Don't you think you're pushing it a little? She whispered, though her tone suggested more admiration than concern. Jules is going to kill you if he hears how you're talking to the customers. Diego poured the whiskey with a dismissive gesture. Did you see how he holds his utensils? Like he's never eaten in a fine dining place before, and he ordered the foie gras just to show off. He didn't even know how to appreciate it properly. Even so, Sophia bit her lip, there's something about him that feels familiar. Yeah, he looks like every wannabe artist who comes here pretending to be the next big thing, Diego replied, adding sarcastically, I'm sure he has a revolutionary album in his garage. Meanwhile, Chef Jules had discreetly peeked out from the kitchen to observe the customer at table 15. His expression oscillated between professional indignation at the ketchup request and barely concealed curiosity. Sacre bleu, he muttered. How does someone order Chateau Lafite and then pair it with ketchup? C'est un crime. The manager, Thomas, who had been observing the situation from afar, finally decided to approach Snoop's table. There was something about the customer that gave him an uneasy feeling, as if he was missing something obvious. Good evening, sir, Thomas said with a professional smile. Is everything to your liking? Snoop looked up from his phone. Everything's excellent, especially the service. It has a unique touch. Thomas noticed the amused glint in the customer's eyes and felt his unease grow. I'm glad to hear that. If there's anything you need... Actually, Snoop interrupted, could you prepare the chocolate souffle? I noticed it takes about 20 minutes. At that moment, Diego was returning with the whiskey. The souffle is quite sophisticated, he commented, ignoring Thomas's warning look. Perhaps ice cream would be more appropriate for your palate. Thomas held his breath, expecting a complaint that never came. Instead, the customer smiled and said, The souffle will be fine, and perhaps you could explain to me what makes it so sophisticated. For the first time that evening, Diego was momentarily at a loss for words. The customer's calm demeanor and apparent amusement unsettled him more and more. At the table celebrating their anniversary, the husband leaned toward his wife and whispered, That guy must be someone important. No one stays this calm under such terrible service unless they're used to handling much more intense situations. The woman nodded discreetly, studying the customer at table 15. There's something about the way he sits, the way he observes everything. He's not an ordinary diner. The rain outside had ceased, but the fogged-up windows created an intimate atmosphere in the restaurant. Most diners had begun to leave, leaving only a few tables occupied, including Snoop's. Diego was preparing the check with a mix of anticipation and disdain. 3,347.85. It was more than he earned in a month. As he walked toward table 15, his mind replayed every interaction of the night, every sarcastic comment, every condescending glance. If you need me to explain the numbers, Diego began, placing the check on the table. That won't be necessary, Snoop replied, pulling a black card from his worn wallet. For a moment, Diego stared at the card. It was different from regular credit cards, heavier with a minimalist design. But that moment of recognition would have to wait until the next chapter, because for now, Diego was still just a proud waiter who had spent the night belittling someone without realizing he was about to receive the surprise of his life. The restaurant was nearly empty now, creating a more intimate atmosphere that amplified every comment and gesture. Would you like to see the wine list again? Diego asked, his tone laden with irony as he held out the iPad displaying the digital selection. I can show you the wines by the glass. They're more manageable. Snoop, who had been discreetly adjusting the position of his phone on the table, nodded with an enigmatic smile. Why don't you surprise me? Something that pairs well with the souffle. The response momentarily unsettled Diego. It wasn't the defensive reaction he had hoped to provoke. At the bar, Sophia polished glasses, increasingly intrigued by the dynamic between the waiter and the peculiar customer. Diego, Sophia whispered as he approached the bar. Doesn't this seem off to you? He's way too calm about your attitude. Probably doesn't even understand that I'm insulting him, Diego replied, selecting a bottle of Sauternes with a touch of malice. These entertainment guys live in their own little bubbles. In the kitchen, Chef Jules prepared the souffle, muttering in French about customers who didn't appreciate haute cuisine. Meanwhile, Manager Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Here you go, Diego said, returning to Snoop's table with a glass of golden wine. A Chateau Soudouireau, though you might find its flavor a bit complex. Snoop took the glass and examined it with genuine interest. Interesting choice. What made you pick a Sauterne? The question, asked with evident knowledge, made Diego hesitate for a second. It's the traditional pairing for souffle, he replied, regaining his condescending tone. Though I suppose you'd prefer a Coca-Cola. At a nearby table, a group of entertainment executives who had been observing the interaction for the past hour exchanged meaningful glances. One of them discreetly pulled out his phone and began typing something. "Sophia," one of the executives called to the bartender. "Is that waiter always like this with customers?" Sophia, wiping down the bar, shook her head. "Diego is usually very professional. Something about this customer has him especially inspired tonight." Meanwhile, Snoop had pulled out his phone again. The screen displayed several notifications from social media about his latest controversy, but he ignored them, opting instead to open a voice recording app. "Mind if I record some work notes?" Snoop asked Diego as he returned to check on the souffle. "The atmosphere here is very inspiring." "Oh, are you working on the next big album?" Diego responded, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Another revolutionary track or maybe something in cannabis?" Snoop suppressed a smile as he adjusted his phone. "Something like that. It's always helpful to document interesting experiences." In the kitchen, Chef Jules was finishing the decoration on the souffle when Thomas approached with a worried expression. "Jules, doesn't the customer at table 15 look familiar to you?" The chef paused, studying the customer through the kitchen window. "Maintenant que tu le dis, there's something familiar about him, but it can't be who I'm thinking of. That guy wouldn't come alone and dressed like that." Diego returned to the kitchen to collect the souffle, catching the tail end of the conversation between Thomas and Jules. "What are you two staring at?" he asked, adjusting his apron. "Diego," Thomas began cautiously, "have you noticed anything particular about the customer at table 15? Other than his complete lack of class and his pretense of being more sophisticated than he is?" Diego replied, taking the plate with the souffle. "He's your typical Hollywood wannabe who thinks he can buy sophistication with a credit card." Thomas tried to say more, but Diego was already heading to Snoop's table with the dessert. On his way, he passed Sophia, who stopped him briefly. "Diego, one of the executives at table 6 just showed me something on his phone," she whispered urgently. "I think you should—" "Not now, Sophia," Diego interrupted. "I need to serve this souffle before it deflates." Reaching Snoop's table, Diego placed the dessert down with an exaggerated flourish. "Your souffle, sir. Do you need me to explain how to eat it?" It's quite a bit more sophisticated than a Starbucks brownie. Snoop, who had been discreetly recording with his phone, angled it slightly to better capture the moment. "Please enlighten me. I'm always eager to learn." The response, once again devoid of the irritation Diego expected, left him momentarily puzzled. He had been provoking the customer all night, and instead of getting angry, Snoop seemed increasingly amused. At the bar, Sophia was hyperventilating after seeing what the executive had shown her on his phone. Thomas noticed her distress and quickly approached. "Sophia, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Thomas," she whispered, discreetly pointing toward table 15. "Do you know who that customer is?" Before Thomas could answer, Diego returned to the bar, shaking his head in disbelief. "Can you believe he just asked me about the physics of why a souffle rises, like he actually cares about the science behind—" "Diego," Sophia interrupted urgently. "There's something you need to know." But Diego had already turned away, responding to a gesture from Snoop requesting more wine. On his way back to the table, he stopped briefly at the service station to check his phone. He had 3 messages from his sister. "Diego, are you watching the news? Answer me. This is important. Please tell me you're not being yourself tonight." He ignored the messages, assuming it was some family drama, and continued to Snoop's table with the wine. "You know," Diego began as he poured, "it's refreshing to see someone pretend so much interest in gastronomy. Most entertainment guys who come here just want to show off how much they can spend." Snoop took a sip of wine, studying Diego over the rim of his glass. "And what makes you so sure I'm pretending?" "Oh, please," Diego scoffed. "I've been in this business for 15 years. I can tell the difference between someone who genuinely appreciates fine dining and someone who's just trying to keep up appearances. The way you hold your utensils, how you pronounce French names, the fact that you asked for ketchup with a prime steak, it all screams new money trying to fit in." At nearby tables, several diners held their breath, torn between disbelief and morbid fascination. The group of entertainment executives had stopped pretending they weren't listening, and one of them was discreetly filming the scene on his phone. 15 years is a long time, Snoop commented, adjusting his phone again on the table. You must have seen all kinds of customers. Oh, absolutely, Diego replied, oblivious to Sophia's desperate attempts to get his attention from the bar. But you entertainment guys are my favorite category. Always so sure you're changing the world with your music and cannabis ventures. Oh, please, Diego scoffed. I've been in this business for 15 years. I can tell the difference between someone who genuinely appreciates fine dining and someone who's just trying to keep up appearances. The way you hold your utensils, how you pronounce French names, the fact that you asked for ketchup with a prime steak, it all screams new money trying to fit in. At nearby tables, several diners held their breath, torn between disbelief and morbid fascination. The group of entertainment executives had stopped pretending they weren't listening, and one of them was discreetly filming the scene on his phone. 15 years is a long time, Snoop commented, adjusting his phone again on the table. You must have seen all kinds of customers. Oh, absolutely, Diego replied, oblivious to Sophia's desperate attempts to get his attention from the bar. But you entertainment guys are my favorite category. Always so sure you're changing the world with your music and cannabis ventures. Snoop tilted his head, genuinely intrigued. And what do you think about the music industry? Ha! Diego couldn't suppress a mocking laugh. Like the rap scene? Please, Snoop Dogg is just another celebrity playing the legend card. At least he knows how to dress appropriately for dinner, unlike... Diego's voice trailed off as realization began to dawn. Something about the amused expression on his customer's face. The way he had mentioned Snoop Dogg, the phone recording on the table, a chill ran down his spine. At the bar, Sophia had buried her face in her hands, unable to keep watching the unfolding disaster. Thomas had started walking toward table 15, but stopped when he saw that Diego was finally putting the pieces together. Diego swallowed hard, his mind racing through every sarcastic comment, every condescending gesture he had made that evening. Excuse me, sir, but you're not... But that realization, that moment of horrified understanding, would have to wait until the next chapter. For now, Diego stood frozen next to the table as the weight of his actions began to crash down on him like an avalanche in slow motion. The night that had started with a waiter's arrogance was about to take a turn that would change his life forever. The silence that followed was deafening. The few diners still remaining in the restaurant had stopped pretending not to observe the scene. The group of executives had placed their phones on the table, recording every moment. Even Chef Jules had peeked out from the kitchen, his white hat visible through the service window. Sir, Diego felt his legs turn to jelly, his mind replaying every scathing comment he had made throughout the evening on an endless loop. Snoop raised a hand, cutting off what was sure to be a stammering apology. You were saying something about legends? Diego's face had gone pale. His throat was so dry he could barely speak. I didn't know. I never imagined that the icon Snoop Dogg might dine alone in jeans. Snoop finished the sentence with a faint smile playing on his lips as he adjusted his phone one last time. You know what's most interesting? Sophia appeared beside Diego, practically materializing out of nowhere. Mr. Dogg, please accept our sincerest apologies. Diego is usually very professional, and he... Is he? Snoop interrupted, his tone genuinely curious. Because in the past 2 hours, I've seen something quite different. Fascinating, I must admit. Thomas, the manager, finally mustered the courage to approach the table. His forehead glistened with sweat. Mr. Dogg, as the manager of Harmony Haven, I want to express our deepest... You know what's most interesting, Snoop interrupted again, addressing Diego while ignoring Thomas's attempts at an apology. It's the first honest conversation I've had in weeks. No flattery, no hidden agendas, just brutal honesty. Diego blinked, confused, his brain still trying to process the situation. You're not angry? Snoop let out a small laugh. I've been recording every interaction. It's refreshing to encounter someone who says exactly what they think, even if it's not very diplomatic. At the executives' table, one of them whispered to his companions, Classic Snoop, turning a disaster into a social study opportunity. Chef Jules had completely abandoned any pretense of being busy in the kitchen and now stood at the doorway, his mustache quivering with excitement. Mon Dieu! I have Snoop Dogg critiquing my soufflé! About that, Diego began, recalling his earlier comments about the soufflé and feeling a fresh wave of shame. Actually, it's delicious, Snoop remarked, taking another bite. Though I must admit, ketchup would have been an interesting addition. The joke elicited a nervous giggle from Sophia, which she immediately tried to stifle with a cough. Diego, on the other hand, felt the world spinning around him. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, probably his sister frantically trying to warn him about who his customer was. Mr. Dog, Thomas tried again. Please allow us to make amends in some way. Dinner is on the house and— Miss the pleasure of using my card after all the comments about my supposed budget limits? Snoop smiled, pulling out the black card he had shown earlier. That would be anticlimactic, don't you think? Diego, hearing his name from Snoop's lips, sent a shiver down his spine. Sir, about my comments on your music and, well, about you. The ones about me being a celebrity playing the legend card? Snoop seemed to consider the comparison. You're not the first to make it, though people usually don't say it to my face while serving wine. The executives at the nearby table had begun live streaming discreetly, knowing this story would go viral within hours. Snoop's handling of the situation was quintessentially his unconventional style. You know, Snoop continued, looking directly at Diego, brutal honesty is a rare quality these days, especially in my world where everyone is so worried about saying the right thing, not offending, keeping up appearances. Diego shifted uncomfortably, aware that every word and gesture was being captured, not only by Snoop's phone but also by the multiple devices now pointed in his direction. Which brings me to a question. Snoop leaned forward, his eyes glinting with genuine curiosity. Why did you choose to be so direct with me tonight? The question took Diego by surprise. He had expected anger, a threat of dismissal, maybe even a lawsuit, not this surreal conversation about honesty and authenticity. Diego looked around, noting the expectant faces of his coworkers, the phones recording, Snoop's amused expression. I guess I got tired of the pretense, Diego admitted, of people coming here pretending to be something they're not, trying to impress. And when I saw you with your jeans and worn sweater, I assumed that you were another pretentious celebrity trying to show off. Snoop finished the irony. Delicious, isn't it? A clap of thunder echoed in the distance, as if the weather itself wanted to add drama to the moment. The rain had started again, softly tapping against the restaurant windows. For what it's worth, Diego added with a nervous smile, your French pronunciations really are terrible. Snoop's laugh echoed through the restaurant, breaking the accumulated tension. Even Thomas, who had been on the verge of a nervous breakdown, allowed himself a small smile. Diego, Snoop said, picking up his phone, you've provided the most authentic material I've recorded in months. The question is, what should I do with it? Diego's heart stopped for a moment. This night could end in 1,000 different ways, and not all of them involved keeping his job or dignity. But for some reason, the expression on Snoop's face suggested that this story might have an unexpected ending. For what it's worth, Diego added with a nervous smile, your French pronunciations really are terrible. Snoop's laugh echoed through the restaurant, breaking the accumulated tension. Even Thomas, who had been on the verge of a nervous breakdown, allowed himself a small smile. Diego, Snoop said, picking up his phone, you've provided the most authentic material I've recorded in months. The question is, what should I do with it? Diego's heart stopped for a moment. This night could end in 1,000 different ways, and not all of them involved keeping his job or dignity. But for some reason, the expression on Snoop's face suggested that this story might have an unexpected ending. The night was far from over, and Diego's fate hung by a thread, but that would be part of the next chapter of this extraordinary evening. As the silence lingered, every member of the restaurant staff held their breath, waiting for Snoop's final decision. But that crucial moment, that decision that would change Diego's life, would have to wait for the next chapter. For now, The waiter, who had unknowingly insulted one of the world's most famous musicians, remained in limbo, teetering between disaster and possible redemption. The rain struck the windows with greater intensity now, and as if nature itself were providing the perfect soundtrack for this pivotal moment, Snoop idly toyed with his phone where the night's recordings waited like silent evidence. "Do you know what's most interesting about these recordings, Diego?" Snoop asked, playing another snippet. "It's not just your comments about me. It's your entire perspective on the music industry, inequality, creativity, all from the point of view of someone living at the intersection of those worlds." Sophia returned with another round of coffee, her hands steadier now that the situation seemed less catastrophic. "Mr. Dogg, may I ask why you started recording in the first place?" "Instinct," Snoop replied, accepting the cup. "When Diego made his first comment about my limited budget, something told me this night would be educational." The executives at the nearby table began murmuring amongst themselves. One of them, a woman in an elegant suit, finally spoke up loud enough to be heard. "Excuse me, Mr. Dogg, but this is exactly the kind of perspective we need in the entertainment industry. The celebrity bubble has isolated us from the realities most people face." Diego shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I wasn't trying to be a sociological study. The best insights are rarely intentional," Snoop replied. "But let's talk about your personal situation. You mentioned your mother. How much does her treatment cost?" The abrupt change of topic caught Diego off guard. "About $12,000 a month. Insurance covers part of it, but we still need around $8,000 extra." "And your sister in college?" "Partial scholarship," Diego explained. "I work double shifts on weekends to help with the rest." Chef Jules, who had been listening from the kitchen, emerged with a plate of macarons. "Pauvre vous," he said, placing them on the table. "And Diego, mon ami, I never knew—" "No one did," Diego interrupted. "I didn't want anyone's pity. I'd rather deal with sarcastic comments about pretentious celebrities," he added, flashing a small smile at Snoop. Speaking of sarcastic comments, Snoop played another recording. "He probably has a revolutionary album in his garage. The irony isn't lost on me," Diego admitted, blushing. "Considering your first album literally started in a similar vein, yes." "Exactly," Snoop finished, "though probably with better funding than your 2005 Honda Civic." The remark elicited nervous laughter from the restaurant. Even Thomas, who had been on edge all night, allowed himself a faint smile. "Mr. Dogg," Thomas interjected, "I understand you find Diego's perspective interesting, but as the manager, I can't overlook the fact that his behavior tonight was inappropriate, unprofessional, brutally honest." Snoop finished the thought. "Yes, all of that, but it was also real, and reality is something in short supply in my world." Diego caught his reflection in one of the empty wine glasses. The arrogant waiter from earlier in the night had been replaced by someone smaller, more vulnerable, but perhaps more authentic. "If I could go back," Diego began. "Would you change anything?" Snoop interrupted. "Would you be more flattering, more fake?" The question hung in the air for a moment. The executives had turned their phones back on, sensing the significance of Diego's response. "No," Diego finally said. "I'd probably be more respectful in how I expressed it. But the frustration, the inequality, the feeling of living in parallel worlds, all of that is real." Snoop nodded slowly, as if Diego had passed some kind of test. "What if I told you these recordings could be the start of something bigger?" "Bigger?" Diego frowned. "Like what?" "Like a conversation the entertainment industry needs to hear," Snoop replied. "A raw, unfiltered perspective on the gap between celebrity life and everyday reality." The executives at the nearby table leaned in, intrigued. Sophia nearly spilled the coffee she was serving. "But first," Snoop continued, "we need to address some practical matters, like your mother's treatment." Diego's heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Dogg, I wasn't trying to—" "I know," Snoop interrupted. "That's what makes it genuine. You weren't asking for help or trying to impress me. You were just being honest, even if that honesty bordered on insubordination." The rain outside had begun to let up, as if even the weather wanted to hear what came next. Diego's fate was about to take an unexpected turn, but that moment of revelation, the instant when a waiter's life would change forever, would have to wait for the next chapter. For now, the tension in Harmony Haven continued to build as everyone held their breath, waiting to see how this extraordinary night would come to an end. The early hours of the morning settled over Harmony Haven, and the decision that would determine Diego's fate hung heavy in the air. Not a single soul had left the restaurant, as if an invisible spell kept everyone rooted to their seats, awaiting the conclusion of this extraordinary night. "Before we move forward," Snoop said, scrolling through his phone, "I'd like to replay something specific from tonight." Diego's recorded voice echoed through the silent restaurant. "In my position, people are usually fake. You treated me like any other customer, though not in the best way. It's fascinating," Snoop continued, "how people's behavior changes when they know who I am. Investors, employees, even waiters, everyone has a mask ready." Thomas cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Dogg, once again, I'd like to express—" "Do you know how many people work directly under me in my label?" Snoop interrupted, ignoring the manager. Diego blinked, thrown off by the sudden change of topic. "Thousands. Thousands," Snoop confirmed. "And do you know how many dare to tell me when they think I'm wrong?" Sophia, still nearby with a coffee pot, murmured, "After tonight, probably one fewer." "On the contrary," Snoop replied with a smile, "tonight has made me think about something important. Diego, how long did you say you've been in the service industry?" 15 years, sir." 15 years observing Hollywood's elite, Snoop mused. 15 years listening to their conversations, watching their behavior, witnessing the disconnect between their grand visions and everyday reality. The executives at the nearby table shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in his words. "And in all that time," Snoop continued, "you've developed a unique perspective, one that isn't afraid to point out contradictions, even if it's not very diplomatic." Diego swallowed hard. "Mr. Dogg, about that, my communications team," Snoop interrupted, "is full of brilliant professionals, PR experts, media strategists, image consultants, all highly qualified and all terribly careful not to offend." Chef Jules, who had been eavesdropping from the kitchen, emerged once more. "Mais, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "What I need," Snoop continued, ignoring the interruption, "isn't more people telling me what I want to hear. I need someone who isn't afraid to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." A silence so profound fell over the restaurant that even the rain outside seemed to pause to listen. "Mr. Dogg," one of the executives at the nearby table ventured, "are you considering Diego?" Snoop leaned forward. "What would you say if I offered you a job?" The sound of a glass breaking echoed through the restaurant. Sophia had dropped the one she was cleaning. "A job?" Diego could barely process the words. "At my label," Snoop confirmed, "on my communications team. Not to polish messages or manage PR, but to provide the raw, honest perspective you demonstrated tonight." Thomas staggered slightly, needing to steady himself on a nearby chair. But he insulted you, mocked you all night." "Exactly," Snoop replied. "And in the process, he offered more insights into public perception of my music and the industry than 6 months of focus groups." Diego looked around as if expecting someone to reveal that this was an elaborate joke. "But I don't know anything about corporate communications." "That's precisely the point," Snoop said. "I don't need another communications expert. I need someone who understands the disconnect between celebrity life and the real world. Someone who's lived that disconnect for 15 years. The executives at the nearby table began frantically taking notes. This was exactly the kind of unconventional move Snoop was known for. "The salary," Snoop continued, "would be significantly higher than a waiter, enough to cover your mother's treatment and your sister's education." Tears welled up in Diego's eyes. I don't know what to say." "Say what you really think," Snoop replied, "as you've been doing all night." Diego took a deep breath. "Honestly, I think you're crazy." Laughter erupted in the restaurant, breaking the tension that had been building for hours. "Probably," Snoop admitted, "but that madness has gotten us pretty far. So what do you say?" "What if I mess everything up?" Diego asked. I'm not exactly known for my tact. Oh, you'll definitely mess things up sometimes, Snoop replied with a grin. But I'd rather have someone fail honestly than succeed dishonestly. Sophia, who had been holding back tears, finally let out a sob. This is like a Hollywood movie, but with rappers and sarcastic waiters. Then, Snoop extended his hand. Do we have a deal? Diego stared at the outstretched hand, then at his co-workers who watched with a mix of awe and joy. He thought of his mother, the medical bills, his sister struggling to stay in college. On one condition, he said finally. Snoop raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What's that? That you let me keep being honest, even when that honesty isn't comfortable. Diego, Snoop replied with a smile. That's not a condition. That's exactly why I'm hiring you. Their hands clasped and spontaneous applause broke out in the restaurant. Chef Jules had begun uncorking bottles of champagne while Thomas finally relaxed, realizing his restaurant wouldn't be facing a lawsuit after all. You know what's the most ironic part? Sophia said as she poured the champagne. Your worst night as a waiter turned out to be the best night of your life. Diego looked around at the smiling faces of his soon-to-be former co-workers, the executives still documenting the scene, and Snoop Dogg sitting calmly with a glass of champagne in hand. The last time I served a table, Diego said, raising his glass, I'll leave a note for my co-workers. Treat everyone with respect, not because they might be disguised celebrities, but because it's the right thing to do. Though in my case, being a jerk somehow landed me a better job. Laughter and toasts continued as the night stretched on. Outside, the rain had completely stopped, and the first rays of dawn began to peek over the Los Angeles skyline. A week later, Diego attended his first meeting at Snoop's label, earning a salary that not only covered his mother's treatment, but also secured his sister's educational future. His first task? Reviewing a draft press release and saying exactly what he thought about it. No filters. Dawn broke over Harmony Haven as the remaining guests shared stories and laughter. Chef Jules had prepared an impromptu breakfast to celebrate, and the aroma of freshly baked croissants filled the air. You know what's the funniest part? Sophia asked as she poured fresh coffee. All the customers who tried impressing Diego with their wine knowledge over the years, and he ends up getting a job with Snoop by doing the exact opposite. Diego, now more relaxed but still processing the night's events, chuckled. I guess I should update my LinkedIn. How about from critiquing celebrities to working for one? I prefer brutal honesty specialist, suggested Snoop, who surprisingly was still there, seemingly enjoying the casual atmosphere. The executives who had witnessed everything were finally preparing to leave. One of them approached the table. Mr. Dogg, the executive said, this is going to change how many companies think about honest feedback. May I quote you in my next conference? Go ahead, Snoop replied, but make sure you mention that the ketchup with the steak was the tipping point. Thomas, who had been crunching numbers in his office, returned with a bewildered expression. Mr. Dogg, about the bill? Charge it as usual, Snoop interrupted, and include a generous tip for Diego. Consider it his last service. Speaking of service, Chef Jules interjected, Diego, mon ami, perhaps you could put in a good word for us at the label for corporate events? Jules, Diego replied with a grin. After the way I treated your most important customer, I think you owe me a few favors. The laughter continued as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Diego pulled out his phone to find dozens of unread messages from his family. I think I should call my mom, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Use my office, Thomas offered. And Diego, I'm sorry for all the times I scolded you for being too direct with customers. Clearly, you knew something I didn't. As Diego stepped away to make the most important call of his life, Snoop addressed the remaining staff. Do you know why I really hired him? He asked, staring at the last drops of coffee in his cup. Not just for his honesty. It's his ability to see through pretension. In a world where everyone is trying to be something they're not, someone who can point out the truth of it when it's uncomfortable is invaluable. Sophia gathered the last of the champagne glasses and the recordings. What will you do with them? I'll keep them, Snoop replied with a smile. as a reminder that sometimes the best ideas come from the most unexpected places. And maybe someday, when Diego is presenting in a boardroom, I'll play them just to see his face. In Thomas's office, Diego was finishing telling his mother the news, tears streaming freely down his face as he listened to her joyful sobs on the other end of the line. "Mom," he said through his tears, "you won't have to worry about the bills anymore, and Maria can finish college. Everything's going to be okay." When he returned to the dining room, he found someone had improvised a sign that read, "From waiter to executive, a Hollywood tale." "It's a bit much," Diego remarked. "Oh, you haven't seen anything yet," Snoop replied. "Wait until the media finds out. Waiter insults Snoop Dogg and lands label job. The headlines write themselves." "About that," Thomas interjected, "should we prepare a press release?" "Let it be," Snoop said. "Some stories are better told naturally. Besides," he added, glancing at Diego, "I think my new communications advisor would prefer to keep it authentic." The sun was high in the sky by the time farewells began. The morning shift employees arrived, bewildered to find an impromptu celebration in progress. "Under your choice," Chef Jules said, handing Diego a package. "The recipe for my soufflé for when you need to impress at corporate dinners." "Thanks, Chef," Diego replied, "though I think my way of impressing people is a bit different now." As Snoop prepared to leave, he paused beside Diego. "First meeting on Monday at 9? And Diego, keep that brutal honesty. Just maybe tone down the comments on my French pronunciation." "No promises," Diego replied with a grin. "After all, you hired me for my candor." And so, as the Los Angeles sun illuminated a new day, the tale of the waiter who dared to be brutally honest with one of the world's most famous rappers came to an end, or perhaps more accurately, to its true beginning. Because sometimes, in the most unexpected places and the most improbable ways, brutal honesty can open doors we never knew existed, even if it includes suggesting ketchup for a $120 steak.